Hi, my name is Ben, and today I am talking the newest Robert Zemeckis film here, which I just want to get it out of the way right now. I am one of the biggest Robert Zemeckis fans simply because I do what I do because of Back to the Future and films like Who Framed Roger Rabbit. These are so fundamental to my understanding and love of film that he kind of gets a pass for me for the rest of his life. Like, straight up, I am always rooting for this guy to make good movies because I love some of his earlier works. With that said, since the 21st century, he has made two and a half good films. He made Castaway, he made Flight, and I think Half of the Walk is a pretty good film. Thus, to say that his record is against him would be an understatement. Going into this movie with here, I kept kind of thinking of Tim Burton, a director who I also love, who's had a rough 21st century, and going into Beetlejuice, where all I really wanted the film was to kind of prove that the artist that I still love is still in there somewhere. And that's what I wanted from this film here. And the construct of here is a pretty straightforward story. There are some weird things about here that I want to talk about today in this review. But essentially what here is it's a movie. It is a single camera. The camera never moves, and we are just in this location. Typically, it is a living room of a family, and we are seeing the day in and day out of beginning of time to basically the 2020s. We're going through all these different stories at this fixed point in this living room, and we're seeing events that unfold eons apart. And largely we are following Tom Hanks and Robin Wright. Those are really the true protagonists who take us throughout. Everything else is kind of background thematic value of this movie. And the construct of here, it's a movie about the today, the tomorrow, the yesterday, 100 years ago, a million years ago. We live, we love, we fight, we grow, we die, we move on. That is kind of the ideas of here. Jumping into here and some of the criticisms I have of this movie is I think it's fair to say this movie is about home is where the heart is. That is a broad expression that you hear that I think is very fundamental to understanding the movie here, because I think that's how the movie is sold to audiences. And I even think that's how the movie presents itself. The issue with here is it's neither fish nor fowl. It's not really a movie about home is where the heart is. In fact, in some ways, it's the complete opposite of that and the prison that is domestic life. But also, it's a movie that I think also thinks it is about the wonders and love and time at a domestic place that you can call home and the wonders of that. That's why I say it's neither fish nor fowl. It's not a movie about home being where the heart is, because large portions of this film follow a couple trapped in their domestic life by situation. One of the characters, played by Robin Wright, who is the wife of Tom Hanks' character, they're this couple that becomes pregnant very young, and they're forced to live in Tom Hanks's father's home. And you see this kind of put a strain on their relationship, and you can tell that the Wright character doesn't actually really want to be there. In fact, so much of the movie is about the tension of her having to live her whole life in this house. And specifically, I think the idea of setting the camera at a fixed point greater emphasizes the stuckness / prison feeling that the Robin Wright character is feeling. So if that is what the movie is about to be, I actually think there's an interesting experience and experiment to say in it, and something that is actually a little bit harder edged than I think Zemeckis typically does. So I find that a little bit fascinating. The issue is that's actually not what the movie is about. And the reason I know that is because the movie makes it quite clear throughout that that's not what the movie is about. And specifically, without getting to spoilers, there is a scene with the Robin Wright character that happens later on in the film. It's really the last few minutes of the film where she says something about basically the wonders of home and along that. And I don't think that's a spoiler, but I think it does illustrate the issue that I have with this movie, which is this character can't feel one way, and for this movie to be about something like this, about this prison feeling, and then also have this completely sentimental ending with this character. Those two things cannot coexist. And I think this movie is trying to make them coexist. It doesn't do it in a convincing way. There is a way to read this movie that is dark. And I think that is, again, what the movie might be trying to say. We confined ourselves into a domestic lifestyle that we build for ourselves, and that to truly experience life, we must break through and break out in search of adventures. And that's what some of the other side stories of this movie are about. You have an aviator whose wife is always telling him to stay home. You have an inventor who has a very supportive wife, and he is trying to build furniture and make a better life for himself. You have quite literally a founding father. In this case, it's actually the son of a founding father who is, writing the Declaration of Independence and trying to build a new nation on principles. That's like another subplot of this movie, which sounds insane. And you even have the daughter of the Tom Hanks and Robin Wright character who eventually moves out of the home. This character, this daughter that is, the focal point of a lot of this movie because of the tension that her birth causes. And then, living and growing up in this house and becoming a family in this house. The daughter leaves this film for basically half the film. Once she is out to college, I don't think we see her again, and it feels intentional. And that is, again, I think, emphasizing maybe a larger idea of this movie, which is you have to break out. Again, I actually think that's a fascinating idea for a movie, but that's not what Zemeckis does with the narrative. Rather, it's a film that seeks comfort in memories. I've always said Zemeckis is a very nostalgic director. In some cases, that's what he does very well. Look at Back to the Future and its understanding of the 1950s and what he is able to understand and also deconstruct about the 1950s and some of its issues. It is a movie here is about nuclear families. It's about kinship. It's about shared experiences. And ultimately, this movie is sentimental, which is an issue when everything that we're experiencing in this movie, the emotion, the heartbeat of this movie, is struggling to show sentimentality. These are characters, especially in the Robin Wright character, who I think is the most interesting character in this movie. There isn't a lot of sentimental to this character. She is, of course, a really good mother. She's a really good wife, but she's feeling trapped. And this movie doesn't really always understand how to deal with that feeling of trappedness. It's rather more focused on the Tom Hanks narrative of this movie, which Tom Hanks plays a character who had dreams of being an artist, who basically gives them all up to work at a dead-end job where he feels that he is always underutilized, underpurposed. He's always in search of more money to support, to one day live the dream of leaving his parents' house. And ultimately, with the Hanks character, he is somebody that loves living in this house. You feel the struggle for him to move out. You feel him just kind of making excuses to stay because this is the life that he's known. I think the film understands that, and I think the film is showing that in some ways that's a bad way, but it also understands Hanks's character, fundamentally why he's attached to this home. I think there could have been an interesting juxtaposition done between Robin Wright and Tom Hanks's characters in these movies. Ultimately, it feels like the movie ends up siding more with Tom Hanks with this role, which again seems to be in complete antithesis to everything that we've seen before unfold in this movie. What Zemeckis does really well as a director, there are moments of that within here. There is a truly sincere director in Robert Zemeckis who capitalizes on nostalgia as a comfort to explain such ugliness that we see now, essentially the same talking points from today, and we're looking at them back then. We see characters lose family members. We see characters lose family members to illness. We see debates about, there's one memorable scene where don't talk about politics with the founding father's son. Like, these are discussions that we still have today and how relevant they can feel. And it's kind of Zemeckis saying, oh, look, even though 100, 200, 300, how many years ago, our experiences were quote unquote different, we were still arguing, we were still discussing, we were still fighting through the same ideas. And that's what here can do very successfully. The same way Back to the Future is an interesting movie of the passage of time, here can have interest in those ideas. And when the film is able to capitalize on those moments, Zemeckis is still apt at handling such moments. I'm going to say that with some major reservations, because while Zemeckis can do some stuff really well, he is lacking at other stuff. I mentioned that there's these other storylines going on. There's one involving the pre-revolution. There's an aviator. There's an inventor. There's a generation of a family unit, which is the Tom Hanks. And then there's a black family that is more set in modern times. The issue with these storylines is outside of the domestic life of Tom Hanks and Robin Wright's characters and Paul Bettany and their whole family, I can't really say I cared about much else going on in the film. In fact, some of the moments are actually just downright bad. There are, like I said, the domestic is what keeps your interest. It's the performances of Tom Hanks, Robin Wright, Paul Bettany, and Kelly Riley, who are all really good in this movie. They are all standouts and they all give pretty solid performances in here. Everything else, all these other characters, all these other different time frames, they have thematic ties to what this movie is supposed to be about, but you don't spend enough time with these characters to feel anything about them, and thus they end up just kind of being there without serving much of a purpose outside of the thematic weight, which it's an issue with this movie because the thematic weight of what this movie is trying to say is fairly obvious, and it's kind of like these other scenes feel like holding your hand to conclusions that Zemeckis is trying to get out of it. Again, all the performances in this movie are pretty good. I wouldn't say there is actually one bad performance in this movie. Some that are underutilized for sure, but nothing particularly like standout bad performances in it. One of the other issues, and Zemeckis has had this issue for quite a while in his career now, and it's been something that's plagued him in the 21st century, is he just cannot get out of his own way with technology. There's been so many bad examples of whether it's Beowulf, whether it's Polar Express, Christmas character, Welcome to Marwin. Like, he just can't get out of his own way with technology. And the issue with this one is the de-aging technology, which I want to give him a compliment real quick and the film a compliment. I actually think the de-aging technology looks pretty good in here. They really use it on Tom Hanks and Robin Wright to make them look like 1980s, 1990s Tom Hanks and Robin Wright. I've heard that it's AI utilized in this to de-age. I don't fully know the story of it. Full credit to them for actually making the de-aging look good. I didn't find it particularly distracting in looks. What I did find the de-aging to be distracting in was the fact that I know what Tom Hanks and Robin Wright look like, especially during this time frame. We are supposed to believe that this is kind of set when they're in their 20s, 30s. And guess what? We have multitude of documents showing what Tom Hanks and Robin Wright looked like and sounded like, including with a film with Robert Zemeckis directing in Forrest Gump. There are scenes where you can clearly tell that this is influenced by Tom Hanks in his big era. And like, the issue with it is Tom Hanks is, if I'm correct, nearly 70. And in this movie, despite being de-aged to look about 20 to 30 range, he sounds like a 70-year-old guy. And this is even more fundamentally an issue because I have a long career with Tom Hanks. Like, I have a relationship with Tom Hanks as an actor. And thus, I know what he sounds like in Big when he's singing Shimmy Shimmy Cocoa Puff. I know what he sounds like because of Woody in the 1990s. I know Forrest Gump. I know what Robin Wright is supposed to sound like next to a young Tom Hanks because I've seen Forrest Gump quite a lot in my life. And thus, that's an issue with this movie. It's just like, yes, you can do pretty incredible stuff with de-aging technology and AI. I don't think it serves the purpose where it's just like, had you just recast these at younger actors? I actually think there would have been less of that uncanny valley and actually may have added a emotional layer / depth to these performances instead of just having them feel a bit stilted. The other issue that Zemeckis has as a director is he does just not understand other perspectives. There is one moment in this film with black parents in this film who are sitting down their son and discussing how to behave if a cop pulls them over. It's ham-fisted to say the least. It's so on the nose, and a lot of Zemeckis' writing in this film is very much on the film. And I think what Zemeckis is trying to capture, and it's a lot of big ideas in this movie, here is not devoid of big ideas. In fact, that's actually some of the better aspects of this movie, is the fact that this movie is trying to say a lot in its short runtime. And again, being generous, as I kind of stated earlier, this movie has something to say about the banality of domestic life and how easy it is for people to become complacent with status quo and the now and forget that time is ever creeping. That is actually fundamental text of this story. There is the boomer nostalgia that I talked about this movie. There is the ways that this movie doesn't capture that, especially with the relationship between Tom Hanks and Robin Wright. I've explored those criticisms and I totally get that. But you cannot ignore that this movie also has this component of it. And we see these ideas because dreams are a big idea in this movie. Dreams being fulfilled and unfulfilled. Because basically a lot of the characters in the different timelines, or different time frames, I should say, with Tom Hanks's character, we get to see them succeed where Tom Hanks doesn't get to. We get to see a man who wants to become a pilot, who gets to pilot. We see a man who wants to invent a chair, who invents a chair. We see a man in Tom Hanks who wants to be an artist, and his wife, played by Robin Wright in this movie, who wants to travel the world. And really, they don't get to experience that. They don't really get to do that throughout most of the film because they're stuck in their current status quo. That is a big aspect of this movie. And again, I think had this movie just been able to focus more around that and actually have something more interesting to say, by the end, this movie actually could have been really good. Ultimately, this is a sentimental movie in here. This is a sweet enough movie. I had no issues or qualms watching this movie here, and I think all the performances are good. And Zemeckis, to his credit, is able to get the most out of the single camera frame of this movie. And could be a gimmick to some. It worked for me enough, and you kind of forget there is this weird kind of transitional aspects of this movie when we're jumping from one time frame to another. As the movie goes along, I actually bought into it and liked it. So there is enough to recommend in here, but it doesn't come together in a way that I found myself emotionally responding to. Ultimately, I was just like, you know what? This is Robert Zemeckis getting to first base, where I didn't know he was still capable of doing that, but he was still able to capture some magic. And I'm like, okay, maybe this guy does have a few tricks up his sleeve, even if it's becoming very hard to continue to give him the second chances. He's probably never going to be back to the form that I wish he was, but there is still greatness in him as an artist. And maybe a smaller scale movie like this can then allow him to focus more on some of these ideas. Maybe I'm just hoping too much, but ultimately here, I like the experience enough. It's not necessarily enough to recommend. I'm going to go 3 out of 5 stars for here, being a bit generous, but ultimately this is one you can wait till streaming if you don't want to see it in theaters. So thank you all for watching. Make sure you go out and vote today, and take care. Bye-bye.